Alright, so after putting some super basic materials on this, all we have to do to render this is drop down the Easy Render Solaris node. And we'll go ahead and I'll turn this off right now. And then we'll plug the Easy Render Solaris node in. And on this node, it's essentially the render ROP. There's a few things that go into actually allowing Redshift to render a scene, and I have all of that built in to this setup. So I'll just go ahead and keep this as is. So on this Easy Render Solaris node, we want to select the camera because by default it's set to dash camera and that's not right. So we'll go into our scene graph tree and we'll find our camera and we'll just drag it into that camera option there. Here we can override the resolution, and then the output image is where we're going to save this. So by default it's just saving to an EXR, and then some of these settings are just some settings that I prefer. You can check on global illumination, which I actually think it is checked on by default. I probably should have done that. There's these are the settings that I like. So these are 3 bounces, primer engine, brute force. It's got some subsurface scattering is checked on, and then I think volumetric lighting is actually checked on by default too. So you might want to check that off. And then down in system, if you don't have optics RT like a ray tracing graphics cards, you should probably turn this off. Or you can turn on the enable automatic sampling, which will usually do a great job for you. And yeah, and then so you have all these main options here, and then the AOVs you can enable by flipping this on switch. And all you gotta do to get some AOVs is just turn on what you want. So you should probably have color or beauty or something like that. We go diffuse raw, reflection raw, maybe reflection filters, specular, and they're all gonna show up. If I turn this render view on, they're going to show up here. So I can browse through these. That's the diffuse raw. This is reflections filtered. This is reflections raw. This is specular. And you can go through these as you feel is appropriate. If you wanted to turn on some camera settings, you would drop a camera node in between the scene import cameras and this Easy Render Solaris node. And basically all you do is, just like how we selected the camera in the Easy Render Solaris, we'll grab the camera and we'll pull it into this printed path. We actually have to change the mode to edit, and I believe we're going to have to do that again. And then the first thing that's nice is you can just initialize parameters for edit. And if you do that, then it's just going to bring in all the parameters that you have set already. So in here, you can turn on the depth of field. If you set a create, I mean, it's the same as the object level stuff. You just have to switch this stupid set or create switch on. And if you have all these set up, then you can turn on all the other stuff you're used to. Sampling, f-stop, all that good stuff. And there should be depth of field. Yeah. You can also, if you want to set the depth of field in the viewport, with this selected, you can Shift F and select meshes. It might work faster if I'm in just the viewport. Just hold Shift and click. So I like the depth of field there. Let's go back to Redshift, and then maybe we turn some of this. I actually think we have to set the focus distance because that's the field that's actually changing when we click stuff. Yeah, so if this is do nothing by default, then this isn't going to do anything, so you actually have to change that to set or create. And then you could change the f-stop, and we're getting some nice little depth of field in here. Now one thing about how Redshift in the viewport actually works is you have these little check marks or little toggle boxes down here. This is progressive rendering, so if you turn this off, then it's going to start rendering in buckets, which will be more similar to your final render, but it's definitely going to take longer and it's not going to update as quick. You can freeze tessellation, you can enable denoising, or you can override materials. And then when you're ready to render, you can just render to endplay or render to disk, and it should push out the frame range that you got going on. But one last thing to note is that when you launch Solaris, it doesn't boot up in the same way that you might be used to. So Solaris renders with something called Husk, and you can see it in your task manager if you launch, let me launch a render. So this really confused me for a while when if I tried to render a current frame, like just a still. If you just render to disk, it's not even going to pop up with a loading bar. You're not even going to understand. You're not going to think that it's even rendering, but it is. And the more times you click render to disk, the more Husk operations it's going to launch. So you don't want that. But if I just click render to endplay, and this is going to yell at me for Axiom, you'll see it pop up here in a second. It might take a minute to actually turn on, but you can see, if I minimize this, you can see there should be, well, it's somewhere in here. Trust me on this. There's a Husk operation that's happening right here. It's called Husk, and it's what's rendering the scene actually. So you can see it start rendering in here. But if you were to render it to disk or anything like that and nothing happened, then make sure you check your task manager and make sure you check the folder that it's actually rendering to, because you don't want to just launch a bunch of these operations just to find out you're trying to render the same scene like 5 times. So hopefully this all works for you. Let me know in the comments if this has been helpful, if the tools work well, or if there's any bugs or problems. I'm definitely going to be around to help and talk to you guys. Thanks.